Welcome to the Slingshot Group podcast. I'm your host, Tim Footsey of Slingshot Group, where we build remarkable teams through staffing and coaching. And for today's conversation, I've got a member of our team with us, Brian Taylor. I was recently in the room at a conference when Brian and Phil Bowdle, also from our team, were presenting a workshop. And as I sat there listening, I thought this would be a great two-part podcast episode. So here you are for part one of hiring trends and top questions for building teams. You ready for this, Brian?
I'm ready and glad to be here.
Well, it's good to have you here. We're going to jump straight in. What's the first trend you're seeing that leaders are navigating right now?
Yeah, it's probably one that we don't want to hear about, but change is the new norm. I remember a few years ago, right, when the start of the pandemic, the word of the day was unprecedented. Times we were living in were unprecedented. And there was this sense that we were just waiting to get back to precedented. We were waiting to get back to the norm, what we used to. And what we know now is change changed. There is no going back.
The norm is changed.
The norm is a new normal. And that's what we're seeing was we're looking at building teams. It requires different level of flexibility. I mean, from a positive standpoint, there's more creativity, more resourcing, more ways for people to stretch and grow. But at the same time, on maybe the more negative side, that constant pace of change is producing more burnout and more bailing. People are struggling to keep up with the pace that is required in this new age. And so it's important for us to acknowledge that there's no going back to the way things were. Change is the new norm. You know, change is the essence and evidence of growth. Growing things change. But we're seeing that push to the max right now as organizations are trying to navigate these new realities.
So, Brian, talking to leaders of teams who want to lead healthy teams, how do we need to lead in this new normal that is change?
Yeah. So when I was a kid, I don't particularly care for math, but I've been able to do it. When I was a kid, though, I would look at a test, I'd see the answer in my brain, I'd work it out, and I'd write it down. And I'd hand in that test, and the teacher would mark me off every time. I'm like, why did I get this question wrong? And the teacher would always say the same thing. I get that you got the right answer, but what you did not do is show your work. And I think as you're navigating change, it's so easy because as leaders, we get to conclusions, we make decisions, we move forward with the vision, but sometimes we leave our teams behind in that change because we haven't shown the work. We haven't taken the time to communicate to them. This is not just the solution we're going to, but here's how we got here. And that, the ability to show your work, it gives your teams confidence, it builds trust, it allows them to catch up to where you are as a leader. And so I think the way that we respond to change being the new norm is to slow down and spend a little bit more time showing our work, allowing our teams to catch up to the decisions that we've made and the pivots that we're making as we're accommodating the realities of the situations and seasons we're facing.
That's really interesting because I think that gives different language for what I'm seeing more in the teams that we work with. People on teams are wanting to know more about the kind of conversations we're having, or why are we having this conversation, or what problem are we trying to solve right here? And that's kind of like showing your work.
Yeah.
There also seems to be a move towards greater vulnerability from upper level leadership. Teams want leaders to be collaborative in problem solving and to admit when they don't know.
Yeah.
And that comes with this constant change type culture.
Absolutely. And that what you just said is so important. You know, showing your work is not about proving the decision. It's not about, hey, justifying why. It's just taking them along the path that you walked on to say, this is where I started and this is what I realized. And there's where I was right about a conclusion I made. Here's where I was wrong. I just want to bring you in on the journey to give you space and time. And so that vulnerability to not just say, okay, this is A, B, C, D, and E of why we're going to do this, but to say, here's what this process has been. Let me invite you into it. Even doing that practically, right? When you think something might be coming, putting some seed in the ground on it with your team in conversations around the table, taking a pulse to make sure you're incorporating all the viewpoints and all the opinions even of the different stakeholders in the situation to make sure that people are comfortable as appropriately comfortable as you can be when you're constantly changing.
Yeah, which isn't very comfortable.
It's not very comfortable at all.
It's not for comfortable people. So, Brian, talk about the next trend.
Yeah, the next trend is that you can't afford what you want. Uh, Change, right? New initiatives, new projects, new realities, cost of living, inflation, economic realities that we're dealing with. All of these things mean often to accomplish our mission, we're not going to quite have all the resources that we need. Maybe there's a particular candidate that you're looking for, and their salary expectations are going to be way outside of what you've paid someone for that role in the past. Or you have people that are stepping into roles where they're having to take on hats and things that they're not used to doing. And so there might be a little bit of a gap in the performance, but we have to understand the resources are going to outpace the needs very often. And so we got to acknowledge that reality.
So, Brian, if we can't afford what we want, what should our focus be to get what we need?
Yeah, that I think first what you just said is true. That's another reality. What we want isn't always what we need. What people on our team want is not always what they need. What our organizations would love to run after might not be the project or the objective that's in front of us. And so as leaders, we have to take the burden of running to the pain. As humans, we are wired to avoid change most often, and we're wired to avoid pain. But as leaders, we have to take that responsibility to go to the hard conversation, to bring awareness to the reality. Hey, this is the way we've done things, or this is how we've staffed this role, or this is how this team has been built. But to accomplish this new reality, this new initiative, to be able to step into it fully, we're going to have to make some adjustments. We're going to have to recognize that we have got to allocate resources or staffing differently. You don't avoid those conversations. You don't hope that people get it by reading in between the lines. You've got to hit those things head on. You've got to run to the pain. There's a story in Scripture, 1 Samuel chapter 17. It's the story of David and Goliath, one of the most popular stories. And in that picture, you see the king and the army. They're cowering in fear. 40 days, 40 nights, this giant is throwing all kinds of insults. And what I love, David comes on the scene, and 1 Samuel 17:45 is one of my favorite scriptures. It starts with a few simple words, and David replied. Everybody else was silent, cowering in fear. David steps onto the battlefield and goes, okay, there's a giant that needs addressing, and he speaks up. As leaders, we don't have the luxury of being apathetic. We don't have the luxury of staying in silence or staying in the shadows. We have to step up to the plate, stepping over the awkwardness sometimes to get to the realities that we have to help our team embrace together. So run to the pain, be courageous, and lead through it all.
What are some of the common obstacles that you see? I mean, I can think of a few, but that you see working with teams, Brian, where people just avoid it?
Yeah. I think oftentimes where there's superficial health, you see these supersized problems that begin to bubble up to the surface, right? So everything feels like it's, sitting around the campfire singing songs, but as soon as there's a point of discontent, or there's a direction maybe that someone doesn't agree with, suddenly you see these issues just flare up. Well, it's because we've not created true health. We've only created surface level health. And so there is no equity, there's no ability, there's no relationship built up to have the hard conversations or to say the difficult things. And so things that should be easy to resolve, situations that should be easy to come to a consensus on, these things get long, drawn out, multiple layered conversations because we've not put in the work before we needed the resource.
Often I see relationship getting in the way too, Brian. You see relationship getting in the way of vision or mission.
Yeah.
And, we've done life with this team member for so long that we've moved them laterally so many times in the organization that they're not exactly the leader we need anymore. And we're holding back them from what God has for them,
Yeah.
but we're also holding our team and our mission hostage
Yeah.
because we're not willing to run to the pain.
Yes.
So many different things we see and experience. Okay, so let's do some rapid fire questions that anyone who is building and leading a team is asking or should be.
Yeah. Should
Right.
be.
Okay,
Should be
here we go.
asking.
How can I tell if someone is ready to get promoted?
Well, I can tell you what the answer is not. It's what you just said. It's not just because they're close.
Mhm.
Proximity is not always the answer. In fact, like you mentioned, there's this bias we have to people that are close to us. We tend to not ask the same questions. We tend to not do as deep of a dive as it is bringing someone in. So when I'm looking for someone that's ready to be promoted or ready to step into new layers or levels of influence, I'm looking for people that carry culture truly, not just because I like them or they're well liked, but when I look at their life, their leadership, I say, this is a person that embodies our mission, they embody our values, and they walk this out the way that we want it to be walked out. People can follow their example, not just their words. And so that's the first thing, that they truly are carrying the culture. And then I look for if they have a track record of success. Like lateral moves can be really great if you've got a problem solver or a fixer on your team that you send in to revitalize, they move. But someone that you keep moving laterally because they can't quite find their fit, that might actually be a red flag that starts to wave. And so I look for a track record of success. When I've handed them something before, what have they done with it? How have they done it? And how long has it taken? People that consistently produce excellent results will continue to grow in their influence and in their leadership. So those two things, that's what I look for, that culture carrier and a track record of success.
It's interesting when we've been working with teams, Brian, and you walk into a situation where somebody is actually already doing so much more outside of their written job description. That's often a really good sign.
Yes.
And it's surprising and not surprising that often the organization doesn't see that.
You're right.
And it takes outside eyes to step in. We've gone into a staffing situation and said we need a new role for this team. And we've gone, oh, actually,
Do you see that person that's right there?
I think you got that person right there in front of you. Okay, how about this one? How do I approach firing someone in a life-giving way with a staff or volunteer?
Yeah. I think number one, you got to recognize that even if you do your absolute best, this is always going to be awkward. And I think if you go into the situation recognizing that it's going to be awkward, it'll give you some space for however the person reacts to the conversation. But here's some practical things. Number one, I would say be kind. Don't be nice. Be kind. Kindness means you're going to say not what they want to hear or what is going to fluff them up, but kindness requires you to be clear and concise, to give them the information that they need in a way that doesn't come across as unkind or angry or bitter or resentful or brings in these outside voices to the room that don't really need to be there. Be kind. Number two, make sure you have all the information. It's amazing what can happen if you ask questions and the assumptions that you might the assumptions that become realizations when you ask a question, instead of just going off of what you think is happening or going to those conversations guns blazing. Go into it asking questions. Okay, let's talk about how things have been going. What do you think about how this area or this team, what do you think about your leadership? The third thing I'd say is it should never be a surprise. Unless there's some situation that pops up where you have to make immediate, quick disciplinary action, and we can all imagine what those situations look like. For the most part, when someone is not working out, if you've done your job as a leader, they're going to probably get to that realization before you have to tell them that, because of your coaching and your feedback and how you highlight how things are going well or how they're not going well. So be kind and give them the benefit of the doubt through some questions. Make sure it's not a surprise. Coach them along the way. And then four, I would just say get to it. Don't drag it out. Don't make them carry whatever emotional weight you're feeling in those conversations. When it's time to make a decision, make the decision. Be very clear with it, kind with it, but don't drag it out.
You don't want to get caught out as a leader, Brian. We talk about it all the time that healthy leadership is built on clarity of
Yes.
expectations, clear communication. And if you get to a stage and the termination or the firing
Hmm.
is a surprise, then you've got to look at how much is on you as a
Right.
leader. Have you been having those regular conversations? Have you been working towards development and there just
Right.
hasn't been development? You've got to be honest about how you've led that individual. And so you want to start now
Right.
so that you've got that process in place so that if you get to that stage, it's not a surprise and you can have that clear communication.
Well, it's interesting. You might get to that conversation and realize you're trying to hold them to a bar you've not raised. And think of how you could be potentially limiting
Right.
someone's influence, someone that could be a great asset to your organization if
Yeah.
only they had clarity.
Yeah.
But you're associating their poor performance with a skill when it really is about a standard that you've not raised.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. How do you know when you've got the right people in the right seat?
The right people in the right seat. This is, I think, something that's always changing, right? Because as changes the norm, right, we're doing things in a way that we've not done them before. This doesn't stick for as long as it used to. Longevity looks a lot different. So, how do you know when you've got the people in the right place at the right time? The
Mm.
first thing I look for is alignment. And you can tell if a team is aligned just like you can if you're driving a car. If you ever drive down the highway and you're on a straight road and you take your hands off the wheel, if the wheels are properly aligned, that car will continue to go straight. If
Mm.
you take off your hands off the wheel and suddenly that car veers to the left or veers to the right, you know you've got an alignment issue. So the same thing is true with your team. How much do you have to
Mm.
keep your hands on that team to keep them aligned with the mission? If you can take your hands off of it for a bit and that team continues to move forward, then you know, okay, we've got some alignment happening. The way that they're moving forward, executing the mission to make sure we're accomplishing what our objectives are, you can tell they're aligned. And then number two is the actual outcome. There are many great things a team can accomplish, but great things aren't always the right thing. And so if your team is not hitting the right mark, they're not hitting that target consistently, then that is a clear indication that maybe you've got some wrong people on the team, or they're in the wrong seats, or there's not enough clarity. Expectations aren't clear. But if you can consistently trust that your team is going to do what is asked of them in the way that's asked of them, regardless of if you have your hands on it or hands off it, that's how you know, okay, we're aligned and our outcomes were on target. Right people in the right seat in the right bus, that's how you know it.
So, Brian, give me a couple of examples of how you take your hands off the wheel and test the alignment without harming the organization.
So there's a concept in a book I've read that talks about leaders focusing on the who and not the how, right? So taking your hands off of it doesn't mean you're kind of forgetting that it exists. You're not just abdicating your role or responsibility as a leader. The way I like to describe it is I'm going to be hands in, but not hands on. Hands in means I'm aware of what's
Mm.
happening, I'm available for communication, I'm making sure that I'm setting clear expectations on the front end, and that I've got some kind of mile markers along the way. So that means you have the team meeting, you assign the objectives and the action items, and then you let the team run with it. In a couple weeks, you follow up. Where are we at? From our last conversation, this was what we said we were going to do. Did we hit those deadlines? Did we move those projects forward? It's rather than checking in every day with the team member. Hey, remember we talked about that on Monday. It's Wednesday. How are we doing? Still doing good? Okay. Okay, it's Thursday. How are we doing? Still doing good? No. You give them the freedom to accomplish what's been assigned in the way that they think it should go based off of the parameters that you've set. And then that gives you a great check in a couple weeks later to know, okay, yeah, I can leave it. Then maybe the next time you can go for 3 weeks before that check in. But you allow the flexibility and the rhythms to be influenced by the outcomes and how they're moving forward with them.
I've always found that a great way to do that too, Brian, is when you're the team leader and you're away from a major team meeting,
Hmm.
and you can get the data points for how that meeting went, the
Yes.
directions that that meeting went in. think that's always a helpful way too. You mentioned earlier that when you're not seeing the results from your team that you want to see, then that could suggest that you need to make some changes. When, how do you decide whether it's just a season or a slowdown,
Hmm.
or whether it's systemic and long term?
Yeah. So there are three areas that if there are going to be roadblocks, this is where they're probably going to pop up. The first is going to be an actual resourcing. So before you go, oh, my team has a performance issue, you go, do they have the resources, the budget, the equipment, the training? Do they have the things that they need to do the job?
Mm.
Okay, check. Yes, they have them. No, they don't. The second would be in relationships. Is there someone that they need to be able to connect with, someone that is on our team at large, or a coach or expert that might be able to give them the wisdom, the insight they need to break through? Okay, we got all the relationships, right? And then the third thing is responsibility. A lot of times, why teams stall is they're afraid to make decisions. They don't know where their authority lies. They don't know if they can actually do it with confidence. And so they wait around for you to give them the insight. They wait around for you to say, okay, do this, do this, do this. So if you can clear all of the roadblocks in the resourcing, the relationships, and that sense of responsibility, then you can evaluate the team actually based on their performance. They have what they need, and let's see if they know what to do with it.
So that's great, Brian. That's a great short list. And as leaders are assessing the effectiveness of their teams
Mhm.
today, and they're looking for top questions for their teams, those are the three top questions.
Mhm.
It's resources, relationships, responsibilities. Can you pose three questions that leaders can ask today as they're evaluating their teams under those three headings?
Yeah. So on the resource, I mean, it's a very simple question. Does my team have what it needs? That's the resourcing
Mm.
question. Do you, and you can actually ask before you go into a performance conversation,
Yeah.
ask the leader that you're evaluating or you're working with, hey, do you feel like you have what you need to succeed? What's missing? What's missing from your toolbox, from your skill set? Is there something that needs to be added to this equation to help you be more effective? On the relationship side, it's actually a question you probably need to ask yourself as a leader, not your team. Who do I know that my team needs to know? Or who do I need to connect with to go before my team? There's a perfect example. If you have some cross team functionalities that are happening and you have to get a different department or area, sometimes if you go to that department head, your peer, and say, "Hey, I'm sending Susie. Susie's going to come and have a conversation with John. If you could just make sure, like, what do we need to know on this side? What can I prep Susie for? And what can you be prepping John for? So that when that conversation happens, there's no friction. They have clarity. They don't feel like anybody's stepping on each other's toes. So that relationships question is really a question that you should be asking yourself as a leader. Who do I know, or what ways can I leverage my influence, my network, and my relationships to set my team up for success? On responsibility, the question becomes, have I given my team the authority that they need to move forward without me?
Mm.
Do they have that confidence, the trust in my backing of them, in my understanding of what their roles are, their understanding of those roles? Do they have that confidence to move forward without me saying, here's step A, step B, step C, step D? So you ask yourself, have I set my team up by success for success by giving them clarity of expectation, clarity of responsibility, and a clear picture of the outcomes we're reaching for?
That's great. So there are some top questions for your team. As we close, Brian, as we work with nonprofits and churches, ministry organizations in this current reality,
Mhm.
tell me one hiring trend that hasn't changed
Hmm.
and probably will never change, contrasted with a surprising hiring trend that you see in the staffing and coaching work that you do right now.
Oh, that's a great question. Of course, you question man,
And I didn't warn him.
right?
I didn't
This
warn
is,
him.
yeah. I think a trend that hasn't changed is that leaders leave leaders, not organizations. Generally speaking, it's amazing in the work that we do. I can go in one organization and see a team that is completely thriving and a team that is completely falling apart in the same culture, same mission, same vision, same values. And so when I look at that trend, well, there's the variable that changes, and is the leader that's responsible for that area.
Mm.
And so the hiring trend, the staffing trend or team building trend that hasn't changed is everything. Was it John Maxwell? Everything rises and falls on leadership, right? That's the trend that doesn't change. A great organization, people can love the mission, vision, and values, but if they don't like the leader, they're either not going to join your team or they're not going to stay there for long. I think something that is a surprising staffing trend that we're seeing is maybe specificity for location. Like candidates these
Yes.
days are so much more specific, especially on the church side of things, right? I have a background on the church side of ministry. When I started in ministry, people would move across the country just clear on a call from God.
The world.
I
Thank you
mean,
very much.
all the way over the world. And now our teams talk to people and they'll give us specific zip codes, or, they're like, I'll move to Nashville, but I'm not moving to Knoxville. I'm like, that's like a 2-hour or so difference, but the level of specificity that now organizations have to navigate in terms of a candidate's expectations, I think that's something that is really developed over the last couple of years.
And that's where we've got to get creative.
Yes.
In telling the beautiful story of why you want to be on mission with this particular team and really focusing in on calling. Brian, I love learning from you. I love getting to serve alongside you. And I know there was so much helpful insight in this conversation about how to lead teams, top hiring trends, top questions to ask. Don't miss part 2 of this podcast coming up with Phil Bowdle. But until then, if you enjoyed it, please share and subscribe. Stay curious and reach for the remarkable.